They poured soda on her and called her trash. They thought she was nobody, but they forgot one thing: even diamonds are found in the dirt. And this diamond was married to the king. Rachel Parker never tried to fit in at Everbright Solutions. She didn't care for the designer blazers or the sky-high heels that ruled the 21st floor. She slipped into the gleaming tower every morning wearing worn ballet flats and a cozy gray cardigan, her brown hair tied back into a low ponytail, carrying nothing but a battered canvas tote and a quiet determination to do her work well. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't loud. She didn't network by the water cooler or share cocktails at rooftop bars. In a world obsessed with appearances, Rachel was invisible. And that's exactly how she liked it. But invisibility comes at a price. It started small. Smirks exchanged over her brown bag lunches, whispered jokes about her thrift store tote, eye rolls when she walked past. Emily Carson, the office's self-proclaimed queen bee, took special pleasure in sharpening her claws on Rachel. Emily wore Gucci like a second skin, spoke with a permanent sneer, and curated her entire life for Instagram. Following her lead were Josh Bennett, the cocky sales rep with the gelled hair and the empty brain, and Madison Lee, the junior designer who lived for viral TikToks and casual cruelty. To them, Rachel wasn't a colleague, she was a target. The first time Emily sneered about Rachel's goodwill chic, Rachel just smiled and looked away. When Josh snickered about how she probably lived in a basement with 5 roommates, Rachel typed harder on her keyboard. When Madison snapped a photo of her shoes and captioned it "Thrift Store Queen" for her followers, Rachel didn't even blink. She didn't fight back. She didn't complain. She told herself that she didn't care, that she was here for the numbers, the data, the patterns she loved finding in chaos, not for their approval. But cruelty, once tolerated, never stays small. It grew. It twisted. It rotted the air around her. Every slight got a little sharper. Every whisper a little louder, every prank a little crueler. And Rachel kept swallowing it all down, locking the hurt tight inside the armor of her silence, telling herself she just needed to push through one more day, one more week, one more month. No one stood up for her, not the supervisors, not the coworkers who smiled at her in the hallway but looked away when Emily's crew struck. Even Brian Foster, the team lead, watched the harassment unfold with an amused smirk, offering nothing but the occasional passive-aggressive comment about fitting the company culture. The worst part wasn't the soda that drenched her cardigan. It wasn't the shove toward the door. It wasn't even the laughter ringing in her ears. The worst part was the fact that when Rachel whispered, "Please stop," the entire office only laughed harder. To them, she was nobody. A shadow, trash, something to crush under their Louboutins and laugh about over happy hour. They didn't know the storm they had just summoned. Because Rachel Parker wasn't the charity case they thought she was. She wasn't a desperate intern clinging to her first job. She wasn't a nobody. And she definitely wasn't alone. 9 minutes later, everything they thought they knew was going to shatter. Because the man walking through those elevator doors wasn't just her husband. He was the king who owned their thrones, and he had just come to tear down their kingdom. Humiliation didn't end with the soda. As Rachel stood dripping in the center of the open office, Emily Carson crossed her arms, smirking like a victor surveying the battlefield. Josh Bennett laughed loudly, slapping a nearby cubicle wall for emphasis, while Madison Lee pointed her phone at Rachel, already live streaming to her followers with the caption, "Office charity case finally melts down." The comments rolled in almost instantly, hearts and laughing emojis pouring across her screen. Nobody offered help. Nobody looked ashamed. In fact, Brian Foster, standing by the glass walls of his office, gave a small, satisfied nod, like he'd just watched a scene unfold exactly as he hoped. Rachel squeezed her eyes shut for a second. The cold, sticky soda clung to her sweater, the sugary scent making her stomach churn. Her hand shook slightly, not from weakness, but from the sheer force it took to keep standing. She wasn't about to give them what they wanted. She grabbed her bag with slow, steady movements, her body burning with humiliation and rage, and started toward the break room to clean herself up. Behind her, Emily called out sweetly, "Take your time, Rachel. Maybe you can mop the floor too while you're at it." The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel, cutting deeper than any blade. In the break room, Rachel locked herself in the single-stall restroom. She stared into the mirror. The woman staring back at her didn't look broken. Not yet, but she was close. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling only slightly, and opened her messages. One name at the top. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She didn't want to be this woman, the one who needed rescuing. She had fought too hard for her independence. She had wanted to prove she could make it here without anyone knowing who she really was. But she wasn't fighting for pride anymore. She was fighting for dignity. And she wasn't alone. She hit send. 3 simple words. It's time. No explanation needed. Nathan would understand. When Rachel stepped back into the main office, the wolves were waiting. Emily leaned against Rachel's desk, arms crossed. Josh sat perched on the edge of the neighboring cubicle, swinging his foot lazily. Madison was still recording, hoping for one last shot of humiliation before the day ended. Brian stood by the conference room, pretending to review paperwork but sneaking glances every few seconds. Rachel said nothing. She returned to her desk, her back straight, her face unreadable. She clicked open her spreadsheet and resumed typing, her keystrokes steady and deliberate. She refused to crumble in front of them. 9 minutes, that's all she needed. 9 minutes to endure the sneers, the whispers, the barely muffled laughter, until the elevator dinged. It was almost comical, the way the room froze, heads turned as the elevator doors slid open. Nathan Pierce stepped into the office. He didn't have to say a word. His presence alone shifted the air, sent a ripple of unease slicing through the floor. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, the kind that looked effortless but screamed power. His dark hair was combed back neatly, his jaw clenched, his posture radiating authority. He didn't look at the decor, the awards on the wall, or the city skyline outside. His eyes were fixed on one person. Rachel. Rachel stood slowly, her movements precise, controlled. The office was so quiet now, you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Nathan crossed the floor in a few long strides. No one dared to breathe. "Rachel," he said, his voice deep, steady. "You ready?" She nodded once, her face calm. Emily recovered first, plastering on a fake smile so fast it was almost impressive. She bounced toward him, hand extended, voice syrupy sweet. "Mr. Pierce, what an honor. I'm Emily Carson, Senior Account Manager here. If there's anything I can assist you with..." Nathan didn't even glance at her. Instead, he turned slowly, surveying the office. The desk with the drenched papers, the soda puddle still staining the carpet, the awkward cluster of employees trying not to meet his gaze. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but every syllable hit like a hammer. "Who's been disrespecting my wife?" Silence. Emily's smile faltered. Josh coughed awkwardly. Madison lowered her phone so fast it nearly slipped from her hand. Brian stepped forward, fake confidence coating his voice. "Sir? There must be some misunderstanding. Rachel's a valued member of the team." Nathan cut him off with a look so sharp Brian physically flinched. "Valued?" Nathan repeated. "Is that why she's covered in soda? Is that why you're standing here laughing instead of leading?" Thinks no one answered. Nathan took another step forward, standing in the dead center of the office now, his presence filling every inch of space. "Rachel Parker," he said, his voice strong and cold, "is my wife. She's the strongest, smartest woman I know. And today, you all showed exactly what kind of people you are." He turned his icy gaze on Emily, Josh, Madison, and finally Brian. "And you," Nathan said, his voice low, dangerous. "You're fired, effective immediately." Emily gasped. Josh's mouth hung open. Madison's face crumpled like wet paper. Brian stammered something unintelligible, but Nathan was already pulling out his phone, issuing orders to security. "You can leave your things," Nathan said. "You won't be needing them. And don't bother applying anywhere else in this city. My name is on every major board, every hiring committee that matters. Your careers here are over." The words landed like death sentences. Security arrived within minutes. 4 officers in navy blazers swept through the office, professional but ruthless. Emily tried to argue, her voice pitching high, but security simply guided her firmly toward the elevators. Josh sputtered protests about unfair treatment. Madison cried, makeup streaking down her cheeks. Brian looked like he might faint. Rachel watched them go with quiet, unshakable grace. When it was done, Nathan turned back to her. He held out his hand. "Let's go home." Rachel didn't hesitate. She slipped her hand into his, her touch light but sure. Together, they walked to the elevator, past the stunned faces of the coworkers who had once laughed at her misery. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The world she had quietly survived was gone, and the woman they thought was nobody had just walked out as a queen. The news didn't take long to spread. By the time Rachel and Nathan's elevator slid shut, the whole 23rd floor was buzzing like a hive of angry, confused bees. Whispers filled the air, messages flooded private Slack channels, and 100 frantic eyes turned toward the now empty desks of Emily, Josh, Madison, and Brian. But that was only the beginning. Nathan wasn't the type to leave a wound untreated. He wanted it cauterized, visible, unforgettable. By Monday morning, Everbright Solutions looked like a different company. Every manager, every department head, every senior executive was summoned to the glass conference room on the top floor. No one knew what to expect. Rachel wasn't there. She didn't need to be. Nathan stood at the head of the table, calm and unflinching. "Loyalty without decency is nothing," he said, his voice low and deadly clear. "Talent without character is worthless, and a company that rewards cruelty has no future in my empire." Silence. He placed a file on the table. Inside were printed screenshots, messages, videos, internal jokes circulating about Rachel for months. Things no one thought would ever come to light. Things whispered in dark corners, under breath, behind closed doors. "Don't worry," Nathan said, almost kindly. "I'm not here for a witch hunt. I'm here for a reckoning." 3 more terminations followed before noon. 1 VP, 2 senior project managers, people who had known, who had seen, and who had chosen silence over integrity. The company's HR policy was rewritten within a week. Mandatory ethics training, whistleblower protections, anonymous reporting systems with direct lines to the parent company's legal team. It wasn't just a cleanup. It was a purge, a systemic transformation. And outside the walls of Everbright, the world noticed. Business journals picked up the story first, then mainstream news. "Billionaire CEO defends wife overhauls toxic workplace culture," ran one headline. "Rachel Parker, the quiet revolution," ran another. Her face appeared on magazine covers, not because she had sought attention, but because her silence had spoken louder than 1,000 angry voices. She wasn't painted as a victim. She was celebrated as a symbol, a reminder that dignity isn't loud, but when it stands up, it shakes the earth. Meanwhile, Emily Carson tried to salvage her reputation with a pitiful LinkedIn post about lessons learned in leadership and empathy. No one bought it. She moved back home with her parents within 2 months. Josh Bennett bounced between entry-level jobs, each stint shorter than the last, his once cocky smile replaced with a permanent edge of bitterness. Madison Lee deleted her social media accounts entirely after her viral humiliation haunted every attempt to rebrand herself. Brian Foster attempted a quiet comeback at a small firm in a different city, but a background check, spearheaded unofficially by Nathan's network, ensured that door stayed shut. Rachel? She never returned to the corporate tower. Instead, she poured her talents into something new, a consulting firm dedicated to helping small businesses grow ethically. She partnered with nonprofits, mentored young professionals who didn't fit the mold, and built a team based on kindness, competence, and grit. Nathan remained her biggest cheerleader, not as her billionaire husband, but as the man who believed in her long before anyone else could see her shine. One Friday evening, they sat on the penthouse balcony, the Chicago skyline stretching endlessly before them, golden and alive. Rachel wore a simple navy sweater, her hair tumbling loosely down her shoulders, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. "You didn't have to go nuclear," she said softly, half smiling over the rim of her mug. Nathan chuckled, reaching out to brush a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I didn't destroy them, Rach. They destroyed themselves. I just turned on the lights so the world could see." Rachel leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Her hazel eyes gleamed with a kind of peace that only comes after surviving a storm. In the distance, the city pulsed with life, uncaring of the tiny wars fought behind glass towers. But in that quiet moment, Rachel Parker knew one thing for certain. She hadn't just survived. She had changed everything. And she had done it without ever raising her voice. Because sometimes, the loudest revolution is the one that begins in silence and ends with the world standing still to listen. In the months that followed, Rachel's name became a quiet symbol of dignity in the corporate world. Not because she had shouted the loudest or fought the dirtiest, but because she had stood her ground when it would have been easier to fall. Nathan often joked that he had torn down Everbright's broken walls just so Rachel could walk free, but deep down he knew the truth. Rachel had never needed saving. She needed recognition, and she had earned it on her own terms. Meanwhile, back at Everbright Solutions, the aftermath continued to ripple. The new leadership team, hand-picked by Nathan, installed a culture of respect and transparency. Annual awards weren't just handed to the loudest or flashiest anymore. They sought out the quiet workers, the diligent analysts, the unseen talents, the Rachels, who kept the engine running while others fought for the spotlight. It wasn't about retribution. It was about redefinition. On a crisp fall afternoon, the company hosted its first Integrity Summit. Hundreds of employees packed into the main conference hall, now refurbished with open spaces, plants, and soft natural lighting, the opposite of the sterile, cutthroat environment it had been. Rachel received a formal invitation. She wasn't obligated to attend, but something in her stirred. She didn't want applause. She didn't crave recognition, but maybe, just maybe, she wanted closure. Wearing a simple navy dress and flats, still herself, always herself, Rachel entered the hall as murmurs of recognition buzzed through the crowd. Some bowed their heads in shame, others clapped quietly. A few even offered genuine smiles, humbled by the lessons they'd witnessed. Nathan was there too, standing discreetly at the back, his arms folded, his expression unreadable, except for the soft pride in his eyes when he looked at her. The CEO took the stage, a woman Nathan had promoted, a woman who knew firsthand what it felt like to be underestimated. She spoke briefly, powerfully. She didn't mention Rachel by name. She didn't have to. Everyone knew who had sparked this change. At the end, the CEO looked directly at Rachel and said, her voice steady over the microphone, "Sometimes, it takes just one person standing quietly in a storm to remind the rest of us what real strength looks like." The applause wasn't thunderous, it wasn't wild, it was something better. Rachel smiled softly, her heart full, and for the first time in a long time, she felt completely seen, not for who people assumed she was, but for who she had always been. As the event ended, a few young employees shyly approached her, thanking her for being an example they could believe in. One woman, barely out of college, whispered with tears in her eyes, "You made me believe I don't have to change who I am to survive here." Rachel squeezed her hand gently. "You don't," she said simply. "You just have to know who you are and never let them make you forget it." Outside, Nathan was waiting. He didn't say anything, just opened the car door for her with a small, knowing smile. As Rachel settled into the seat, watching the city lights blur past the window, she realized something. She hadn't just won a battle. She had helped build something better. And she had done it without rage, without revenge, without ever lowering herself to their level. Not by shouting, not by fighting dirty, but by standing, by enduring, by outlasting. And in the end, it wasn't the loudest voices that changed the world. It was the quiet strength that refused to break. At Batgirlie was the simple woman who refused to disappear. It was the diamonds that refused to stay buried. Rachel Parker didn't set out to become a symbol. She didn't ask to be the story whispered through boardrooms and circulated in leadership workshops. She simply lived by a principle too many had forgotten. Dignity isn't something you demand, it's something you wear, even when the world tries to strip it away. She never shouted. She never threw fists. She never played their ugly games. She simply stood, and when the storm came, she weathered it without bending, without bowing, without breaking. Today, somewhere out there, another quiet fighter sits at a too small desk, wearing a cardigan that's been laughed at, eating lunch alone while whispers curl around her like smoke. She hears the giggles, the snide comments, the judgment. She feels the sting of being unseen, unwanted, unwelcome. But maybe now, because of Rachel Parker, she also knows this. The world's judgment doesn't define her worth. Their laughter doesn't diminish her value. Their cruelty doesn't decide her future. Maybe now she stands a little taller, holds her head a little higher, believes, even in the smallest corner of her heart, that she is a diamond too. And diamonds don't break. And maybe you, yes, you, know someone just like her. Someone the world has overlooked. Someone whose brilliance has been hidden beneath layers of assumptions and prejudice. If you believe in standing with those who are underestimated, unseen, unheard, share this story. Remind the world that kindness is strength, that resilience is power, that true worth doesn't wear designer labels or flash bank accounts. It shows up quietly, humbly, unshakably, and when it does, it changes everything. Because sometimes, it's not the loudest voice in the room that matters. It's the quiet soul who refuses to be crushed. What would you do if you saw someone like Rachel today? Would you stand with them, or would you stand silent? The choice always belongs to us. Choose kindness, choose courage, choose to see the diamonds the world tries to bury. Because when they rise, and they will, they don't just change their story, they change all of ours.